Hi everyone, Jennifer Schaus here. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us in our webinar series as we cover the DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. And a little bit about the series. They are typically held, our webinars are typically held on Wednesdays and Fridays. This week we're skipping Friday due to the federal holiday that was thrown in. But all of our webinars are complimentary and recorded. You can find all the recordings over on our YouTube channel. There's 750 plus government contracting webinars there. All of the corresponding PowerPoints can be found over on slideshare.net. That's also a free site. You can log into slideshare.net with your LinkedIn credentials or any email address. If you are interested in sponsoring or advertising in our webinar series, you can drop us an email. It's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to the hello@jenniferschaus.com. In the event that you found this link through an external website that wasn't ours, you can go onto our website, click on the tab called the DFARS, scroll down and you'll see that on the left-hand side, we actually covered the series back in 2021. So anything that you look at there obviously is a historical recording that might be irrelevant and has possibly and probably changed. Everything on the right-hand side is the current year. We're going to find the recordings as well as anything that we've yet to cover. Also, we want to tell you a little bit about us. We are based in downtown DC, and our services are listed here on the screen. You can find more about us on our website, but just wanted to draw your attention to our primary service being helping companies get onto the GSA and VA schedules, as well as other contract vehicles. And on that note, I want to draw your attention to an executive order that came out on March 20th, which is consolidating federal procurement through GSA. So if you do need help getting onto the GSA schedule, drop us a line. We're happy to have a conversation to make sure that you meet, preferably exceed all the requirements, and that the GSA schedule is in your best interest. A little bit more about us. We can also help you if you're selling to federal contractors. We've got a newsletter that reaches over 38,000 subscribers, and you can put ads in the newsletter. You can also put on your own webinar. You can sponsor events. And speaking of events, we do have one coming up on Monday, so less than a week away, over at the Kennedy Center. We expect about 300 people, and the federal government will be there as well. You can see the logos of the attending federal government agencies. We've also got a great list of sponsors. The registration link is there at the bottom of your screen. It's also on our website under events. Here's just some stats on our newsletter. If you are interested in advertising, again, drop us a note and we will send you over our media kit. Okay, we want to thank our in-kind sponsors. GovEvents.com is the premier platform for posting events related to government and government contracting. You can find all of our webinars and actually the recordings over on GovEvents.com. Also, the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority has an online calendar for events and webinars in the local DC metro area. You can find all of our events and webinars over on the Fairfax County EDA calendar. We also want to thank Tom Johnson and his team at Set Aside Alert. That's the go-to publication for finding opportunities related to small, women-owned, veteran-owned, hub-zone, and 8A firms. Visit setasidealert.com for more information. The Virginia Apex Accelerator is a trusted resource and funded through Department of Defense. They provide local training, counseling, and mentoring for aspiring government contractors, as well as matchmaking events. If you want to sell to state, local, or federal governments, please contact your local Apex Accelerator. You can use the links on your screen to find the Virginia Apex training calendar, free resources, and you can also schedule an appointment with a counselor today. Okay, our paid sponsors is what allows us to put this series on complimentary to you. So BidSpeed, they will be with us at our event on the 23rd. The BidSpeed platform allows users to search public sector opportunities at the federal, state, and local level. Users can also find anything from a compliance matrix to teaming partners, incumbent point of contacts, expiring contracts, and proposal templates. Discover, manage, and secure government contracts with BidSpeed. BidSpeed is an official partner of the SBA's ETG and Power to Grow program. Contact BidSpeed today. C3, if you're thinking about contracting with the Department of Defense, you need to prepare for CMMC. That's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. C3 suite of CMMC solutions include C3 Command, C3 Catalyst, and C3 Core. These solutions answer the needs of every defense contractor. Whether your CMMC priority is a fast defined path to compliance or you need the flexibility to manage multiple environments, C3 offers solutions. They are your partner with a deep expertise in IT, cybersecurity, and compliance. You can contact C3 today using the website you see on the screen. WorkPlan. WorkPlan is an online contract management and accounting tool designed for federal contractors and hosted by Amazon Web Services. Get and stay DCAA compliant, manage expenses, timekeeping, and forecasting, plus use the WorkPlan platform to manage your capture process and your CRM. Contractors can integrate their HR and payroll into this one easy-to-use solution. Contact WorkPlan today. Ateria. Ateria specializes in Microsoft Cloud licenses and services for government and government contractors. Ateria provides a business advantage for Microsoft Government Cloud licensing, managed IT administration and security, as well as data intelligence services and solutions. They implement secure, compliant, and scalable solutions to enhance operations, reduce risk, and uncover opportunities. Contact Ateria for expert IT assistance. Okay, last but not least, and then we're going to dig into the DFARS. We want to thank our friends over at the Gov White Papers. Gov White Papers is the central hub for government and government contractors to find and post content geared towards solving public sector challenges. With your free membership, you can add relevant white papers, case studies, data sheets, and more, making your content available to a wider government audience. Have the expertise but not the content? Gov White Papers can also create materials to meet your specific needs. Join for free today at govwhitepapers.com. Okay, we are here to cover the DFARS, specifically Part 236, which is Construction and Architecture Engineer Contracts. We've got a great speaker today, Andres Vera. He's from Thompson Hine. He's got some great slides. I was looking at them this morning. I'm going to stop talking and turn the floor over to Andres. So Andres, thanks for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Jennifer. Really appreciate that very lovely introduction. Hi, everybody. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Andres Vera. I'm an attorney with Thompson Hine, and I'm with our government contracts practice group. Thompson Hine's a full-service law firm with locations across the country. We do basically every legal need that you could possibly think of, but my specific focus is in the federal government contracting space. We represent government contractors of all sizes in all manner of government contracts issues, whether that be compliance, bid protest claims, certification issues, contract interpretation issues, and things like the certification programs for the Small Business Administration and other certifying entities. My focus is pretty broad, but I do represent quite a few clients who are in the small and mid-sized space, so plenty of experience dealing with small business certification issues, joint venturing, subcontracting, and compliance issues specific to small business government contractors. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about DFARS Part 236. So this is dealing in construction and architecture and engineer contracts. Today we're going to be covering just generally what DFARS Part 236 is, what the key subparts are, the provisions related to the procurement of architect engineer services, AE services, procurement of construction services, and then the hot topic that sort of everybody in the GovCon space is talking about, the overhaul of the FAR, known by many names, but among them FAR 2.0. Next slide. So what is DFARS Part 236? So we'll start with sort of the most basic, and if you've been following this series, you probably heard some version of this a few times, but the DFARS is the Department of Defense's supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR, and provides the specific and often differentiating terms that are applicable to Department of Defense contracts as differentiated from civilian contracts that are subject to the FAR and civilian agency supplements like DFARS, right? Separate and apart from the DFARS is a document called the PGI, the Procedures, Guidance, and Information Supplement to the DFAR, so yet another supplement. The PGI is non-binding, but provides procedures and guidance information mainly geared towards Department of Defense contract officials. That also somewhat governs this process, but is like I said, non-binding. The DFARS is one of the more developed FAR supplements, given the size and scale of DoD and the importance of defense and national security that's often involved in these contracts. And the DFARS applies to all branches of the military and the Department of Defense. So Part 236 builds on FAR Part 36, which governs the Department of Defense and acquisition of construction and A&E service contracts. So FAR Part 36 outlines sort of the general policies and procedures pertinent to the government's purchase of those services, and DFARS Part 236 adds on to those to ensure compliance with military construction standards and other statutes and regulations that have come down to govern these specific types of contracts, given the size, scale, and risk associated with contracts for the Department of Defense. Next slide. So there are 6 subparts to Part 236, 3 of which are most important, and those are the ones that you're seeing on the screen. So the special aspects of contracting for construction, the 2-phase design build selection procedures, and the term specific to architecture engineer services. Next slide. So we'll start with the section on special aspects of contracting for construction. So as I mentioned, given the risks and size of these contracts, construction is procured in a much more complex and prescriptive manner as compared to other types of services that the government acquires. Hence why it gets its own part of the FAR and part of the DFARS. So the DFARS builds on a number of the FARs, of FAR Part 36's requirements. And those, again, are focused on the specific requirements around how the government goes around about acquiring construction and A&E services, such that the government's risk is somewhat reduced, and there's an increase in the quality of the work and limitation on taxpayer expense. So one of the ways that the DFARS builds on FAR Part 36's requirements is in this first point. An independent government estimate is something that is often used in government procurement, but in the context of construction, it is even more important. Right. So what these are is it's an independent estimate developed by government officials to estimate the cost of the project. So here the cost to build, which has to be done as part of the acquisition planning process. And what is a little bit different for these types of services with the Department of Defense is that the DFARS requires that this cost estimate, this IGE, be filed within the contract file as if it were a bid itself. So that is something that is a little bit different and makes it so that it's a little bit more of a standardized process that is part of the contract record to include that estimate as part of the contract file, which can be very important in the context of a protest or any issues that might arise as part of the contract performance. Another aspect that's added by the DFARS is that the solicitation must disclose the estimated magnitude of the construction, which is essentially the range of the cost, but they have to do so without actually disclosing the IGE. That IGE is going to be an important but sensitive analysis that's done by the government, and the government does not want prospective offerors to use the IGE as a means to manipulate their pricing. So, for example, the IGE might be significantly more than what a contractor might estimate for its own costs to build. And as long as there's no potential issue with respect to the contractor's understanding of the project, then the government would, essentially benefit from not disclosing that IGE, given that contractor's lower price. So that is why they hold that price close to the vest, that IGE close to the vest. However, to make sure that there isn't any sort of limitation that's caused by a contractor kind of racing to the bottom on price to get the bid, and then or to get to the contract award, and then turning around during performance and seeking additional costs. There's a requirement to disclose the expected magnitude of construction in these ranges. Now, the FAR in Part 36 provides a number of ranges that max out at $10 million. So DFARS adds to that, given that many DoD contracts, particularly military construction, can often be much more expensive than civilian construction. The DFARS adds on the additional ranges that you see on the screen. Moving on to liquidated damages. So liquidated damages is a major issue in the world of construction in both the commercial and the private sectors. But specific to the public sector and what the DFARS adds to this. So the FAR and DFARS both speak to the ability of the government to impose liquidated damages, which are damages that are set forth in the contract that say basically that if the contractor is unable to deliver the project as scheduled, so if the project runs late, then for each day that it is late, the government is entitled to recover damages that are set at a daily rate. So the contract will say for each day that it is late, damages of say $400 per day are included. Now that amount of liquidated damages is pretty discretionary to the government, but it typically runs anywhere from about $25 to $30 per every $100,000 of contract value. But there is no sort of bright line rule, so that amount can be more or less than that approach. Next slide. Okay, so for some special considerations for sealed bidding. So if you don't know what sealed bidding is, that's effectively where there is no negotiation. So this is not FAR Part 15 where it's a contract by negotiation. Instead, this is a sealed bid where there is an invitation for bid as opposed to an RFP that allows contractors to submit their bid sealed, and there is no negotiation associated with that. So the bids are sent, they're opened at the same time, evaluation commences, and a selection is made solely based on that bid as is. So as you can imagine, for situations where there is sealed bidding and there could be some potential for insufficient funding on the side of the government, then the DFARS provides some encouragement to the contract officials to use additive or deductive items in the bid schedule, and it's typically one or the other. It's usually not both. And what that basically means is that as part of the proposal, the contractor is giving the government a sort of menu of options, right? Optional additions to the contract scope or optional reductions from the contract scope. And so the government can sort of pick and choose based on its funding situation which of those things it's going to include in the contract scope. So that gives a little bit of flexibility to the government while allowing the contractor to sort of price out those sorts of additions or subtractions at the outset, as opposed to dealing with that in a change order scenario. Moving to 236, 215. So most construction contracts are on a firm fixed price basis, but for some projects, other types of contract structures are used. Among them is cost reimbursement. But this is generally disfavored because of the nature of construction work and the risk that it places on the government. Think of it this way: a firm fixed price contract, that contractor's risk is that the price is going to adequately compensate the contractor for the work performed, right? In that case, if the contractor's cost is more than the price that the government is paying, then that is the contractor's risk, and the government's price is unaffected. On the other hand, with a cost reimbursement contract, the government might have a sense of what its costs are going to be in terms of the price it's going to pay for the contractor based on the IGE and other estimates, but the actual cost is what is reimbursed to the contractor. So that means the government could end up paying more than it expected if those costs exceed what is expected, right? So because of that, cost reimbursement contracts are generally disfavored. So because of that, DFARS 236, 215 says that they cannot be used. These cost reimbursement contracts cannot be used for military construction or family housing, and that's even the case during times of war, which generally involves a lot more of a looser, contracting and procurement process. So even in that circumstance, cost reimbursement contracts are generally prohibited. Next slide. So moving to 236, 270. So under some circumstances, the contracting officer can order or approve an expedited completion date. And this usually will happen when something occurs during performance that necessitates speeding up the project. Sometimes that is this project is being done alongside other projects. Those other projects are moving faster than expected. Things need to be moved up, or sometimes it's in the interest of national security or defense, things just need to move quicker than they were planned to be at the outset of the contract. But what happens when there is an acceleration and expediting these types of contracts is that there's going to be additional cost. Contractors going to have to move things a little bit more quickly, potentially pay additional fees to have things expedited, and is going to pass those costs along to the government, given it's the government that's ordering the acceleration. So given these additional costs, that needs an additional level of approval under the DFARS. So that acceleration must be approved by the agency head, who must specifically say that the additional cost is necessary to protect the national interest, and must establish a reasonable completion date that is capable of being met by the contractor, and that is often something that is discussed and in some ways negotiated between the government and the contractor. On 236, 271, so this is similar to 236, 215, which we talked about on the last slide, which was disfavoring cost reimbursement contracts. Similarly, 271 disfavors cost plus contracts, and for those, they cannot be used unless approved at really the highest levels of the Department of Defense. It's really the Secretary of Defense at sort of that level, or an immediate designee. Next slide. Okay, so another unique sort of aspect of the DFARS when it comes to the procurement of these construction services is pre-qualification of contractors with proven capabilities. This is really supposed to be used only for complex and time-critical projects because this is a little bit of a a conflict with the competition requirements required by the Competition and Contracting Act and other statutes governing federal procurement. This functions almost a little bit like an IDIQ, where in a normal IDIQ, there'd be a competitive process where contractors are selected to be on this IDIQ so that they can compete for task orders. As part of that process, right, effectively the government is pre-qualifying those contractors, and the ones who pass muster, who offer the right technical approach and pricing, that is sort of the process that's used to sort of pre-qualify them. But in timely and critical projects for the Department of Defense, sometimes there's not enough leeway or time to go through a competitive process like that. And so the DFARS provides a mechanism by which the contractors can be pre-qualified in a less formal and non-competitive process. But given the that is somewhat antithetical to the requirements for competition in federal procurement, the head of the contracting activity that is procuring these services must approve the use of this pre-qualification in writing and must bless the pre-qualification procedures. And as part of that, they also must consider small business participation through the SBA's certificate of competency process. That again is there to ensure an increased level of competition, notwithstanding the pre-qualification, but also to encourage the use of small businesses in the defense industrial base. Next slide. So some additional requirements that are unsurprisingly specific to the Department of Defense arise when we're talking about construction in foreign countries. Now, this can be construction that involves military bases overseas, or other military installations overseas. Can also potentially run into construction related to Department of State operations overseas as well, or sometimes the intelligence space. But when it comes to building overseas, there are numerous additional requirements to ensure that, notwithstanding building overseas, that there is an emphasis on the use of U.S. firms and that there isn't any potential degradation of security when it comes to these facilities as a result of being overseas. So what DFARS 236-273 states is that if the contract value is going to exceed $1 million and is performed in the United States outlying areas in the Pacific, the Kwajalein, atoll, which is the Marshall Islands, or in countries bordering the Arabian Gulf, those contracts must only be awarded to U.S. firms, except in two narrow circumstances. First is that the lowest responsible U.S. bidder, so the lowest bidder from that's a U.S. firm that meets the minimum requirements of the solicitation, if their bid is at least 20% higher than a foreign firm that also meets the solicitation's requirements, then the government can award it to that foreign firm. The other time when they can avoid awarding to a U.S. firm is when it's for a contract for military construction in the Marshall Islands, and the lowest responsible bid is from a Marshallese firm. So the PGI also has some guidance on working agreements with foreign countries, and does have some additional guidance for those contract officials when they are utilizing a foreign firm as their contractor. As you can imagine, that's going to involve some additional qualifications, some additional security issues, and additional reporting requirements, among other things. So that can be found in PGI 236-273. Next slide. Okay, next is on steel acquisition. So this is certainly a point of focus, particularly under the Trump administration. It was in the first Trump administration. It is now again. But there is certainly many ways that the government seeks to protect the U.S. steel industry and the defense industrial base's use of steel in DoD acquisitions. So 236-274 imposes specific restrictions on steel acquisition in military construction, which basically states that contracting officers can't allow the contractor to acquire steel from foreign sources unless U.S. producers, fabricators, or manufacturers are effectively given the first shot. And the mandate is basically to use U.S. steel unless you can really establish to the contracting officer that there's a reason why that should not be the case. And typically, it can't just be limited to it's much cheaper to say use Chinese steel. There typically needs to be a greater explanation beyond that, such as schedule needs and needs with respect to the quality of the steel. That sort of thing is usually what can be utilized there. And contracting officers can grant waivers to this requirement in narrow circumstances, but do have to document their analysis and why granting that waiver is in the interest of the government. Next slide. Okay, so on to part 236, subpart 3. So this is about the two-phase design build selection procedures. So we'll pause here for just a kind of brief history. So until around the mid-90s, the government purchased these architecture engineer services and construction services separately through a design bid build mechanism. So a designer would provide the design under an initial contract. So the government would say, this is, we're trying to build this building. Here's kind of what we're thinking. Go design it for us. The architecture engineer firm would design the building, and then that would be what is delivered to the government. And then the government would take that design and separately solicit for the construction services. That can create problems and complexity, and often involved, project risk. Separating the construction process from the design process often meant going back to the designers in the middle of construction performance, which is quite typical in a construction job. But it was a little bit difficult when we were dealing with two separate contracts. So over time, the government and much of the construction industry generally moved toward the design build process, whereby the procurement would be for both the design and the construction services. And with the passage of the Clinger-Cohen Act in 1996, we get that emphasis on design build in the federal procurement space, and with it, the two-phase selection process that is covered by subpart 236.3, right? So the way that this two-phase selection process works is that it's in the first phase, the contractor's technical approach, qualifications, past performance, and other non-price factors are what is evaluated. So the government essentially does not look at price, as part of phase one. And there could be other technical evaluation factors that are saved for phase two as well. At the end of the phase one, the field of contractors is narrowed. Typically, it's 5 or fewer contractors that are left. And at that stage, it moves on to phase two, where the government will either obtain additional proposals that are specific to phase two, or sometimes they will have it all submitted at once. But at that point in phase two is when they will engage in evaluating all the technical and price proposals that are looked at and are typically evaluated on a best value basis. So what offeror presents the best value to the government, which might result in, other than the lowest price contractor being awarded, if the government is able to establish that the additional price premium is in the best, it represents the best value and is in the best interest of the government. So that process is governed by FAR Part 36, and what the DFARS adds to it is placing more restrictions on that middle period between the two phases where the government's narrowing the offerors. So what the DFARS says is, if the value of the contract exceeds 4.5 million, then no more than 5 offerors can move on to phase 2, except in narrow circumstances, including that the IDIQ, that's an IDIQ for design build services, which makes some sense because there's going to be additional, competition at the task order level, or if the head of the contracting agency or their immediate delegate approves in writing that a higher number is in the best interest of the government. That's a fairly rare scenario, but it does happen sometimes, particularly where it's a very close call, say between 6 offerors. But like I said, it's pretty rare. Now, if the contract value is less than 4.5 million, then the number of offerors selected to move on to phase 2 is purely at the discretion of the contracting officer. And sometimes it's listed in the solicitation, but typically not, so that the contracting officer can, have kind of their own leeway in making a decision as to whether to limit it in that manner. Next slide. Okay, so like the FAR, the DFARS, imposes a bunch of additional contract clauses that are specific to the DFARS, and much of them are in line with the requirements that we were just discussing. So these clauses could honestly encompass their own presentation. But just briefly, a few of them are related to how to structure and the rules governing price proposals for modifications when there's a change, what needs to be included in the price proposal for any of those changes during performance. There are clauses on standards on contract drawings and specifications. Prohibitions on obstructing navigable waterways in the course of construction, how payments for mobilization and preparation of construction are handled, airfield safety clauses, and some of the stuff that some of the clauses that address some of the issues we've already covered, such as the additive and deductive items, and the requirements on U.S. firms building overseas and on the acquisition of steel. Next slide. Okay, so now on to architecture engineer services, and this governs the design of firms for federal construction contracts. So much of these requirements are governed by the Brooks Act, which sets standards for the acquisition of architecture engineer services and construction design, and requires the use of a qualification-based selection process, which we'll talk about in a moment. But stemming from the Brooks Act is this policy that design work is typically expected to be somewhat cost limited, at least compared to the scale of or the cost of the actual construction itself, right? So and Congress has taken a very close look at this issue in response to prior Department of Defense aid services contracts that have been particularly expensive. And so as part of the policy written into 236-601, there needs to be written notification to the congressional defense committees if the total estimated contract price for AE services or construction design for military construction, military family housing, or restoration or replacement of damaged or destroyed facilities, when that contract is expected to exceed 1.5 million, there needs to be a written notification to Congress, and that has to happen before the funds are allocated for that work. And generally, where that notice is required, it's going to be an electronic means, and the agency has to provide sufficient notice to allow for the allocation of those funds, and for Congress to be able to question that and put a pause on things. So that needs to happen quite early in the process, and does sometimes hold up these processes, though often this is much of a rubber stamping sort of process, particularly where the costs are just over that 1.5 million threshold. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, these services are governed by the Brooks Act, and that requires this qualification-based selection process. In short, what Congress is trying to do here is to say that design work cannot be a race to the bottom. This can't be the typical process where price is king, and you can basically overlook or reduce technical qualification and experience to a nullity. And so the evaluation processes like lowest price technically acceptable are very much disfavored for design work for the Department of Defense. And of course, that is more than reasonable, given how important it is that these military facilities are well designed. So the DFARS adds to the typical requirements of the Brooks Act that are incorporated into the FAR by requiring that the agency publish the qualifications that will be evaluated in the competitive procurement process, and how important each evaluation factor is. Now, that's pretty typical already in the solicitation processes, even outside of the Department of Defense. But this is much more prescriptive in how it makes makes very clear to all offerors what the evaluation criteria is, and the order of importance that's going to be associated with it. So this clause also, the 236-602-70, adds yet another requirement to favor the use of U.S. firms for AE contracts that are valued above $500,000 and are to be performed in Japan, NATO countries, or countries bordering the Arabian Gulf. And for those contracts, they must be awarded either to U.S. firms or, importantly, joint ventures that are made up of a U.S. firm and a host nation firm. And that approach is increasingly utilized, particularly in NATO countries. But that is another option that makes the A&E approach somewhat different than the construction approach, which is really focused on U.S. firms and doesn't have that specific carve out for joint ventures. Next slide. So as anybody in the contracting world knows, when it comes to competitive procurements, past performance in the performance evaluations through the CPARS system and otherwise are incredibly important and can make or break proposals in for competitive procurements. So it's very important for contractors to ensure that they get those performance evaluations and that they're favorable. But what could happen and sometimes does in the context of these design build processes is that the government is often very focused on schedule and on the actual quality of the performance, which tends to mean that they focus much more on the construction aspects of things rather than on the design by the A&E firm or the A&E aspects of performance. So what 236-604 does is to make sure that agencies are obligated to at the end of construction to provide that performance evaluation, and to make sure that that is handled by the contracting personnel that are most familiar with the architect engineer's performance. That's important because often the contracting officer might not have the direct knowledge of the design performance that say their technical representatives or others on the ground for the agency might have. So this clause requires that somebody who is actually experienced with the actual performance of the design services is the one who's conducting that performance evaluation. So next is 236-606-70. So this deals with the statutory fee that is limited by statute, right? So the National Defense Authorization Act at a number of points has created this price or fee limitation on the AE services associated with the construction contract. Up until the 2024 NDAA, that was limited to 6% of the project's estimated construction costs. As of the 2024 NDAA, that has been increased to 10%. So effectively, the cost of the A&E portion of the contract cannot exceed more than 10% of the estimated construction cost. Again, this is in line with the thought that the design aspects should, the costs of that should be somewhat limited as compared to the cost-heavy construction side of things. Now, importantly, this also applies to modifications and to redesigns that are required through no fault of the AE. Say the government makes a change or a construction contractor or subcontractor runs into an issue that requires a design change, then the AE portion can be changed, modified to include additional design. That too is subject to the 10% cap. Now, importantly, this 10% cap does not apply to other services that the AE firm may be performing that are in addition to, but are separate from, the preparation of the designs, plans, drawings, and specifications. So for example, if they are providing some additional services to, say, consult with the construction contractor or the government in a manner that's not specifically in connection with the preparation of those documents, that is not subject to this 10% cap. So it's important for contractors to be able to sort of track what's against that cap and what's not. Next slide. Okay, so on to what everybody is talking about right now in the GovCon space, among many other things. But as many of you have probably heard, the Trump administration is undertaking an initiative to overhaul the federal acquisition regulations, and that includes the agency supplements like the DFARS. So what I'm going to talk about here is specific to sort of everything about this overhaul, and part of the reason for that is that this is a staged process, and we have not seen what the administration is going to do with FAR Part 36 and by extension DFARS Part 236. So this all started with an executive order on April 15th of this year entitled Restoring Common Sense to Federal Procurement. And what this signaled was a major shift in the way that federal procurement policy is done. And in line with much of the Trump administration's approach to the regulatory environment, the thought is to overhaul the FAR, DFARS, and agency supplements largely to cut back on the regulatory burden on both contractors and on government agencies. So the goal that was put forth in the executive order is to create the most agile, effective, and efficient procurement system imaginable, I guess, by streamlining procurement processes, reducing complexity, and really reducing regulatory burden. This initiative has gone by many names, but it has been officially branded as the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, or RFO. Next slide. So the RFO does have a website that is being used to send out the revisions to the FAR, and it's being done in parts. So part of what the executive order was seeking to do was to cut down on the size of the FAR. So there's been much made of the fact that the current FAR is 2,000 pages long. There's a lot of complex regulations. There's some duplicative regulations. There's plenty of band-aids on band-aids. I think that almost anybody in the federal procurement space can agree that there is a significant portion of the FAR that could certainly use some revision, but no administration before maybe since the Clinton administration, but this seems to go even beyond that. But no presidential administration has really taken such a aggressive approach to overhauling the federal acquisition regulations. So in terms of what their approach is, there isn't a ton of clarity here, but one thing that is clear is that what the executive order has mandated is the elimination of all FAR provisions that are either not required by statute, are not essential to sound procurement, and are not necessary to protect economic or national security interests. So the not required by statute is really the one that's getting the most sort of attention. So the process by which they are determining what FAR clauses are statutory and are not statutory is certainly unclear. And I will tell you, as somebody who spends my entire career neck deep in the FAR, DFARS, and other supplements, it's hard for even me to really affirmatively state this one is this particular part of the FAR, or this particular clause is specifically required by statute or not. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they make those determinations, and I fully expect that there are going to be legal challenges that are going to come through as this progresses. But with those other two categories, sound procurement and economic and national security interests, I think that that's going to result in quite a few FAR provisions that are not required by statute, nevertheless sticking around. But the executive order does mandate consideration for a regulatory sunset for any of those non-statutory provisions. And what that's basically going to require is that if a FAR clause is subject to this regulatory sunset, it's going to need to be affirmatively renewed every 4 years. That is certainly going to result in some issues, I suspect. I think that there's probably going to be some clauses that are sunsetted without intention, but we'll see how that progresses. And in terms of the function, so the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the FAR Council are going to be issuing each of these parts of the FAR, and are going to be issuing class deviations and temporary guidance to address gaps until final reforms are in place. Now, this is important because what's happening is that these parts are being rolled out immediately, and they are given essentially immediate effect through these class deviations. So far, as of today, actually, the latest part was rolled out, which was part 18, but so far, the parts that have been rolled out are part 1, 10, 11, 18, 34, 39, and 43. Now, those parts are I would say probably less impactful outside of the government at this stage. They deal with things like market research and acquisition planning, some administrative, sorts of issues. I think that we're going to see the real major changes to contractors when they start addressing, parts like Part 15, Part 16, Part 13, and Part 36, like we've been talking about today. So, like I said, there's going to be immediate effect to these through these class deviations. But one thing to keep in mind if you have a contract is that it does not impact your contract unless your contract is modified to incorporate the new provisions. So more to come on the FAR rewrite, and of course my firm and plenty of others are writing about this. But for now, really do appreciate everybody's attention today. And as it says on the slide, please do not hesitate to reach out to me directly if you've got any questions about FAR Part 36 or anything else in the GovCon legal space.
Great. Thanks so much, Andres. And I apologize. I think I may have had a slight audio issue. That's why I advanced the slide. I wasn't sure if you were on that or if the audience could hear you. But great presentation. Nice job covering DFARS Part 236. If anybody has questions about today's content, please contact Andres directly. You've got his contact information here. And he's also over on LinkedIn, pretty active, I believe. If you are listening to the recording of today's webinar, give us a like, leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. And then just a friendly reminder, we'll be at the Kennedy Center on Monday, June 23rd in Washington, D.C. for our networking event. Hopefully around 300 folks will be in attendance. So we look forward to seeing you there. You can register using the link at the bottom of your screen. And again, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll pick up next week on Wednesday and Friday, but again, we are skipping Friday of this week. So thanks again, Andres, and thanks again, everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you.